What is your name?
Doug Bowen Flynn.
Can you please tell me where you're from?
Originally,
Yes.
Seattle, Washington. But I also grew up in Texas and North Carolina, and I lived in Scotland for a while.
Can you tell me a little about yourself?
I'm a teacher. I'm also an actor. I went to elementary school or kindergarten in Texas, elementary school in Tacoma, Washington. Then my family bought a farm in western North Carolina, so I went to a rural Appalachian middle school for 2 years, and then went to boarding school for high school. Then moved back to Seattle, lived in Scotland for a year, and then moved back to Seattle again, finished college there. Met my wife, moved here to Boston for graduate school, and settled in the north end of Boston.
How was life like in Europe when you went there? Was it different from America? How different was it?
Yeah, it was a lot different. For one thing, my generation there were quite a few people who really didn't like America at that time. We had just come out of the years of Reagan and the follow-up years of George Bush Sr. and Middle George Bush Sr. being president, and he was neither of them were particularly popular in Scotland. Plus, there was a great deal of anger in Scotland because of Margaret Thatcher's poll tax system, and because Margaret Thatcher was very popular with American politicians, they blamed some of their problems also on America's connection to Margaret Thatcher. That created some interesting problems. There are also, quite frankly, a lot of people that they don't like there, that they identify as Americans, are the same people we wouldn't like here.
Yeah.
And the quieter Americans they think are Canadians.
Okay. Why were you in Europe at the time?
I was studying, when I graduated from high school, I wanted to go into diplomacy. And so I was studying international economics and international relations at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Berlin Wall?
Sure. So while I was there, the students started protesting on the wall, and at the time Gorbachev was in power. There was a lot of talk about this guy, Yeltsin, who was gaining some popularity and the president of Russia. But Gorbachev had declared the policy of perestroika and glasnost. And those combination of those two policies, the openness and the economic policies, capitalism, really freed up a lot of Eastern Europe to make its own choices, particularly in Germany, where you had East Germany and West Germany, and East Berlin, West Berlin, that still identified as a single country that had been split by the Cold War. The idea of reunifying Germany was a huge deal. And so when people started protesting and the Soviet tanks didn't roll in, it gained a lot of momentum, and it was sort of this clarion call around Europe. Berlin's gonna be free from the Soviets. The Soviets aren't going to stop reunification. And so students started protesting on the wall, and immediately all the flights to Berlin were booked. You couldn't get there by train, by nothing. My college roommate had a connection at the airline, and he got 2 tickets held for us. And so I called my parents to wire some money over so I could get the plane ticket, which sadly did not arrive in time. So he went. But there were huge celebrations. I mean, it was a crazy party all over Europe. And I don't know if it was just the younger people, but the older people certainly, who lived through World War II, had this sense of finality of this Cold War battle. And the wall, I mean, people protested on the wall for maybe 3 days, 4 days. And then started taking sledgehammers to it, and it came down within a week.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I mean, it was amazing. And immediately, the talk of reunification of Germany began. And it began and was over very quickly, because almost immediately as well, Czech Republic was free, and Hungary very quickly followed. And so all of these, Finland, and all of these countries that had been the border of NATO, of Europe, and a border of the Soviet Union, suddenly came over.
Okay.
And I remember Boris Yeltsin in an interview saying, people were asking him about this changes, and he said, you talk about all of the territories of the Soviet Union seceding from the Soviet Union. What if Russia secedes from the Soviet Union? What if Russia's the one that leaves? Which is eventually what happened. The collapse of the Soviet Union, all of those occupied countries just left. And it was just an amazing sense of accomplishment, of freedom.
Kaylee led Billy to the main office. Kaylee led Billy.
Huge focus on that idea of freedom. And at the same time, apartheid was going on in South Africa. So Nelson Mandela was still in prison. U2 was doing concert tour designed to reinforce the idea of freedom. The movie Cry Freedom had come out about Biko, who had died in a South African prison. And so it all reinforced this idea of human freedom, human rights, and global equality, which just hadn't existed. I mean, the United States had supported apartheid in South Africa, which you would think after 100 years of Jim Crow laws in America, that we would have been a little more careful about being involved in somebody's exact same policy. With the years of oppression under the Soviet Union, watching those people become free was equally amazing. Actually, I did get to go visit after the wall fell.
Oh, okay.
And it's remarkable watching, particularly in Prague, because they had not been allowed to participate in Western culture, period, before all that time, for 50 years. 4 years, 50, almost 50 years. What happened was they tried to live all of those decades of Western development simultaneously. So you had Elvis, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, and the 80s, New Wave music, all being played by different bands in different places at the same time. This was like they were trying to live the 60s, the 70s, the 50s, all at once, in the 80s, all at once. So that was really cool to watch sort of Eastern Europe play catch up.
Yeah, that's cool. So I read on history.com, it said that a lot of people died from trying to climb over the wall. Did you know anything about that?
You mean when the wall came down?
Yeah.
Well, so people had died since the wall went up. When the wall went up, because before the wall was up, people who were in East Berlin just crossed over to West Berlin. But Berlin was in Eastern Europe, so West Berlin was this pocket of freedom. But once you got to West Berlin, there was nothing the Soviet Union could do to stop you from flying out of the country. So that's how you got free. And it was the easiest place to do it. So they put the wall, Checkpoint Charlie, right up there at marking the dividing line of the city, and it was armed. So there were troops there. And if you tried to cross that wall, they shot you.
Oh man.
So nobody crossed that wall. Now, when the wall came down, they weren't shooting people on the wall. Maybe some people died getting drunk and falling off the wall. But the history of people dying crossing the wall in the Berlin Wall was people who were trying to escape from the Soviet Union, because that was the easiest place to do it. And that was true anywhere in the Soviet Union. The defectors You couldn't, maybe it's a concept we don't really understand today. You were not allowed to leave that country.
Mhm.
You were followed. There was, even for athletes, if there was a sense that they might try to defect, they might try to leave the country,
Mhm.
they wouldn't be allowed to travel.
That's not.
Similar to maybe the Cuban baseball players are the closest equivalent we have now.
Okay. Yeah.
But now anybody, Russia's not stopping anybody from leaving.
Mhm.
We may not let as many come in as want to come in, but nobody's saying you can't leave the country. Imagine something that you couldn't move out of the U.S.
So, say if the wall didn't fall down, do you think life in Europe would be much different?
Yeah. You wouldn't have all of Western, all the new EU allies. So the European Union was in the process of growing at the same time, and so a lot of those countries were able to come into the European Union.
Mhm.
The borders with Russia became much more secure because they pushed back. So these countries that had been Soviet but allied themselves with the West really became part of the European Union and part of NATO.
Mhm.
And so that buffer zone pushed all the way back to Russia. Especially once the Ukraine
Mhm.
defected, and that's really what allowed it to happen. Ukraine is a huge part of Russia.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing now is the fallout of Russia's economic collapse and their sort of embarrassment, and Vladimir Putin pushing this idea of national pride to try to reinstate the Soviet Union.
Mhm.
By pushing into Ukraine, trying in some ways to reclaim the former Soviet Union, which is an incredibly dangerous place for us to be right now.
Did you know that this was one of the biggest events in modern history?
Yes. I knew it was one of the biggest events in modern history when it happened.
So, if you could, would you go back to Europe to visit the wall?
Yeah. No, I intend to. I certainly will take my daughter and show her.
Oh, okay. And you haven't been back to Europe since after?
Oh yeah, I've been back to Europe a lot.
Oh.
I haven't lived there, but I have lots of friends there, and so I travel. I actually went traveling through Eastern Europe about 10 years ago,
Mhm.
and went and revisited Prague and Budapest and Vienna. It's amazing the changes that had happened, and I guess even more since then. At the time, Budapest was the one that was the most recently freed city.
Okay.
So that was where you could see the most lingering effects of Soviet rule.
Mhm. Let's see. So when the wall fell down, like when you were in Europe, did you feel like in danger? Like
No.
never did feel in danger.
No, I felt in less danger than I had ever felt in my life. I mean, when I was a kid in Seattle's one of the top military targets because of the Air Force Base, the Army base, and the nuclear sub base are all there, as well as a huge Navy base. And so when I was a kid, every Wednesday in school, we had a drill at 2 o'clock every Wednesday. Air raid sirens went off throughout the entire city of Seattle and the entire city of Tacoma, imitating a nuclear strike. So if nuclear weapons were coming, what would you be doing? And the hilarious part, of course, is that as kids, what we did every time the air raid siren went off, you got out of your desk and you climbed underneath your desk, because clearly a desk will stop a nuclear bomb. But that was it. I mean, that's what I grew up with.
Yeah. Okay.
And those air raid sirens didn't stop
Mhm.
until after the wall fell.
Oh, okay.
So, that sense that we are no longer at the brink of global annihilation
Mhm.
is great.
So,